All right, so you've been sending us some really fascinating material
Yeah.
that really dives into this question of, you know, is there a place where nobody dies?
Mm-hmm.
Like some kind of realm
Right.
beyond our current experience where, like, death just doesn't happen.
I mean, that's sort of the ultimate question, isn't it? Like, what is beyond this experience that we have?
Right?
Yeah.
Is this it?
Like, is this all there is?
Yeah.
Or is there something else?
Is there some sort of permanence?
Yeah.
And the sources that you sent really kind of go into
Yeah.
a specific spiritual perspective on this whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about Satlok, and then they also, bring up heaven and hell. And
Right. Yeah. The more familiar kind of
yeah, exactly.
versions of the afterlife.
Our deep dive today is really going to be about unpacking these ideas from the sources that you sent.
Exactly.
We want to understand what they're saying about this realm beyond death, and how one might even get there according to this information.
Absolutely.
So let's maybe start with just how these sources that you send talk about this traditional view of the afterlife.
Okay.
Like heaven and hell.
Yeah. So the picture that the kind of paint of heaven and hell is pretty familiar, I'd say, to a lot of beliefs, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that, they're both temporary stops and they're based on, the balance of our good and bad actions, our karma in this lifetime.
Okay.
So sort of like a cosmic system. Of
right, like rewards and boards and, consequences. Okay.
Yeah.
And they have this really interesting analogy in the sources.
Okay.
About how heaven is like a hotel.
Oh, okay.
You get to go and you enjoy the fruits of your good deeds.
I see.
Your virtuous earnings, they call it.
Okay.
But just like any hotel stay, you eventually got to check out.
Right, right.
So there is an end date.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not.
And then you got to go back to
a permanent residence.
The cycle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, hell is depicted as the place where you got to face the consequences of your negative actions.
Right.
And there's even this pretty vivid example, I thought, from the Garuda Purana.
Okay. Where
it talks about, people who consume alcohol having to drink urine in hell.
Oh, wow.
Like they're really stressing the,
That's intense.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is that both of these places, heaven and hell, they're just temporary stops within this much larger cycle of birth and death across 84 lakh life forms, as they put it.
Okay.
You spend time in these realms, but then you're right back in this.
And you're back in the
reincarnation
cycle.
Right. And what I thought was interesting is they actually say that you shouldn't even desire heaven or hell. Like that was kind of
That's an interesting.
Like don't even desire these.
Don't get attached to either.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, I mean, what do you think is significant about that for, our listener?
Well, I think it really kind of points to this idea that, even the ultimate rewards or punishments aren't really the end goal here. Like they're emphasizing that these are temporary states.
Right.
And maybe there's a dissatisfaction with just oscillating between these two things.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, where the idea of the Satlok becomes so compelling.
All right, so let's get into Satlok then.
Yeah.
Because this is described as something totally different.
Right.
It's described as a supreme place apart from heaven and hell. Mm-hmm. And they actually call it our real home. Which is really kind of makes you think about,
where did we come from?
Yeah, where did we come from?
What is our origin?
What is our origin? Exactly. And the sources make this really bold claim that the knowledge of Satlok has actually been kept hidden by religious gurus.
Okay.
So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, that suggests that there's more to the story than we've been told.
Yeah, like that maybe the spiritual understanding that a lot of people have is incomplete.
Right.
Okay. And then they go on to talk about this prophecy.
Okay.
Which says that after 5,505 years of Kali Yuga, the whole world will go back to Satlok.
Okay.
Now, we're in March of 2025.
Right.
So,
so that's a ways off.
Yeah, that's a ways off.
Yeah.
Kali Yuga is a huge epoch, in Hindu cosmology.
Right.
So 5,505 years from the start of that is,
it's a different
quite a ways away.
Time scale.
So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, for sure. Like this timeline that's being presented, it's all within this bigger kind of cyclical understanding of time.
And within that whole framework, they describe this event where God himself descends to Earth from Satlok.
Wow.
And he comes in the form of an enlightened Tattvadarshi saint, they say.
Okay.
And the reason that he does this is to impart true spiritual knowledge, or Tattviyan, with the aim of guiding humanity away from this endless cycle of heaven and hell, and towards this true salvation, which is a return to Satlok, which is our real home, they say.
That makes sense.
So let's actually dig into the description of Satlok.
Right.
You know, like, how was it created? What's it like? What's its essential nature?
So they say that Satlok, along with other higher spiritual realms, were brought into existence by this supreme almighty Kabir Dev, also known as God Kabir, through the power of his word.
Oh, wow.
So this idea of creation through sound or utterance, you know, it's a concept that pops up in a lot of different spiritual traditions.
Right, like the let there be light.
Exactly, yeah, like that kind of thing.
And in Satlok, Kabir Dev manifests as Satpurush, which means the eternal Lord.
Okay.
And they give him a bunch of different names, too, like Akalmurti, Shabad Swarupi Ram, Purnabram, Param Akshar Brahm.
Okay.
All these different names that point to these different aspects of this supreme being.
Yeah.
And the description of his form I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
They say that he appears in human-like form, but incredibly radiant.
Okay.
Like the light emanating from just a single core of his body is greater than the light of millions of suns and moons.
Wow. That's it's a lot of light.
It's almost impossible to imagine that level of brilliance.
Yeah, it really emphasizes this idea that this is a divine being, unlike anything that we can really conceive of.
Totally. And then it goes on to describe how from a single divine word, 16 islands emerged.
Okay.
And then from 16 more words.
16 more words.
16 sons were born.
Okay.
And these sons have these names like Karunakar and Gyanswarup.
Okay.
They represent these different divine qualities within this whole cosmology.
Okay, so like powers.
Powers. And then there's this Mansarovar.
Okay.
Which is a sacred lake filled with nectar.
Okay.
And this image of the nectar-filled lake as this place of purity and transcendence, is a theme that pops up in a lot of spiritual traditions.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting to see it here.
Yeah.
And then the story kind of takes an interesting turn.
Okay.
With the creation of Akshar Purush, who's also called Parbrahm.
Okay.
By Akint. So Akint is tasked by Kabir Dev to do this work of creation. But he creates this being, Akshar Purush, who then goes to Mansarovar, falls into a deep sleep.
All right.
And then Kabir Dev actually has to step in and wake him up.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and from that awakening comes Kal, who's also known as Jyoti Niranjan, or Kshar Purush.
Okay.
And they actually give his real name too, which is Kal.
Right, Kal.
Yeah. And the story says that Kal's emergence is actually due to Akshar Purush's anger.
Okay.
Which is kind of specific detail.
Yeah.
And then they're both instructed to reside in Kakant's Island.
Okay.
Which sort of implies that they're,
Right, they're subject to
Kavadev's authority.
Ultimate authority.
Exactly. And then Kavadev creates everything else.
Okay.
So this includes Rajeshwari Shakti, which is the divine power that establishes universes.
Okay.
And then all the individual souls.
Right.
Which are described as being created in his image.
Okay.
And that idea that souls are reflections of the divine, is again something that you see across spiritual traditions.
Common theme.
And the pious souls who reside in Satlok, they're often called Hans or swans.
Oh, Hans. Okay.
And their bodies are said to be created in a similar manner to the divine.
Okay.
With an effulgence, like 16 suns.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a lot of suns.
It's a lot of suns.
Yeah.
But pretty bright.
Very bright.
So they lay out this whole creation narrative.
Yeah.
And then they move on to describe Satlok itself.
Okay.
And the characteristics of it. And it sounds like an amazing place.
Let's hear it.
They say that it's a place of eternal happiness without lack.
Wow.
Without birth and without death.
So that's the ultimate.
Yeah, that's it.
Promise right there.
Escape the cycle of death.
To overcome mortality.
Right. Yeah. That was the question we started with.
Yeah, exactly.
And they also say that there's no sun or moon in Satlok.
Really?
So it's like, it's self-illuminating and it's imperishable.
Wow.
Doesn't need an external
anything.
source of light.
Yeah.
It's not subject to decay.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And they give all these sensory details about the place, too.
Oh, okay. They talk about white, shiny soil.
Oh.
Unspoiled water and food.
Nice.
Trees bearing these incredibly sweet fruits.
Oh.
Rivers flowing with milk.
Rivers of milk.
With like ultimate abundance and purity.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they talk about the mountains.
Okay.
They're studded with diamonds and pearls.
Wow.
These amazing palaces and plains for the pious souls.
That sounds
so it's like
luxurious.
Yeah, it's like this realm of
yeah.
profound spiritual and material beauty.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously of a
of that
defined,
kind,
but yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. They also described the social harmony there.
Oh, okay.
So men and women are said to live together with love and respect.
Yeah.
And there's no lust. And there's no abusive language.
Wow. So they've totally transcended those negative things.
All that stuff that kind of plagues us here on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gone in Satlok. Yeah. And then they go back to talking about the Hans, the pious souls.
Yeah.
They say their bodies are so radiant that they have a light equal to 16 suns.
16 suns.
Wow. And when they're at Mount Sarovar,
yeah,
it's like 4 suns.
Still
so super
bright.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they describe God's own body in Satlok.
Okay.
In this Gamarluk, this immortal realm.
Yeah.
And they say that his light exceeds the combined brilliance of 10 million suns and moons.
Wow.
So we're talking about just like unimaginable.
It's just pure
light here.
Yeah,
Yeah. And everyone there has eternal youth.
Wow.
No negative emotions.
Okay.
And they sustain themselves on these nectar fruits. And this Suda, which is this divine nectar. So they're just like eternally vital.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better
Yeah.
than our experience here.
Pretty different for our lives here on Earth.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting. They actually tried to quantify the distance to Satlok.
Yeah.
They say that it's approximately 4,800 quadrillion kilometers from Earth.
All right, so it's a little bit of a commute.
Yeah, like impossible for us to...
Yeah, I don't think we have a...
Couldn't fathom that number.
Spaceship that can take us that far.
It would take a while.
Yeah.
And they say that reaching it isn't just like a physical journey.
Okay.
You know?
Makes sense.
It requires you to gain all this spiritual merit. You have to offer your earnings to different deities.
Okay.
And you got to successfully navigate all these different spiritual
realms. Yeah.
Including ones ruled by Kal and Akshar Brahm.
Okay.
So it's like this...
A whole journey.
Spiritual ascent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they also try to like find evidence for this Satlok in existing scriptures.
Okay.
So they say that it's referred to as Sanatan Paramdam in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
And as Ritnam in the Rig Veda.
Okay.
So they're trying to connect this idea with
like finding some
those Vedic traditions,
that grounding
in those texts. Yeah. And they talk about all these figures like Swami Ramananji, Sant Ramdas Ji, Sant Garibdas Ji, Sant Tadu Ji, and Sant Nanak Dev Ji. And they say that they were all personally taken to Satlok.
Wow.
By Supreme Almighty Kabir Sahib himself.
Okay.
And then returned to this world.
Wow.
And then they went on to...
So they got like a sneak peek.
Yeah, like a sneak peek.
And then they had to come back.
Yeah, and then they talked about the glories of that realm.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and they specifically mentioned Kabir Sagar's Amar Mool as containing this really detailed description of Satlok.
All right, so there's like eyewitness testimony.
Yeah, like they're using that as evidence.
Right.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay. They also point to specific verses in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, like chapter 15, verse 4, and chapter 18, verse 62, as scriptural evidence for this idea. That you should seek refuge in the Supreme God in order to reach Satlok and break free from this cycle of birth and death. They also cite verses from Guru Nanak Sahib in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib.
Okay.
And they mention accounts of his meeting with Guru Kabir Sahib, who they call Baba Zinda.
Okay.
In the Pai Bail Janam Saki.
Okay.
And they talk about Sankaribdas Ji's experiences and his teachings about being taken to Satlok by Kabir Sahib.
Okay.
So they're really trying to
use these different...
Bring in all this different evidence.
Different sources.
Yeah, so it's not just a matter of belief, they're saying.
Right.
There's this
it's not just
specific path and practice involved.
It's faith. It's like there's an actual method.
What is that path and practice?
So they say very clearly that the only way to go to Satlok is by taking refuge in a truly enlightened saint, someone who possesses this true spiritual knowledge, and by diligently practicing the method of worship that they impart, which is called Satbhakti. Along with these two mantras, Satnam and Sarnam.
Satnam and Sarnam.
And they're presented as like the keys to unlocking this path.
So how do you know if you found an enlightened saint?
Well, they actually give some guidance on that. They refer to Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verses 1 through 4, which talks about this metaphor of an inversely hanging world tree. And they say that a true enlightened saint will be able to accurately explain the meaning of this complex metaphor.
So that's like a test.
It's like a test. And they also mention this prophecy that's attributed to Kabir Sahib, which says that his representative saint will face opposition and criticism.
So like you're not necessarily going to have an easy time.
It's not going to be like a smooth ride. Like people push back resistance.
And I think the idea is that, sometimes established religious authorities might not like it when someone comes along with new interpretations or different ways of doing things.
And then they also give a bunch of scriptural references that point to other attributes of a true saint. So they mention the Yajurveda, the Kabir Sagar Granth again, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and the Samaveda. And these all kind of point to these different characteristics.
So what are some of the...
Like being able to complete incomplete Vedic sentences. And imparting this 3-stage process of worship that includes these sacred sounds called Sarnam and Sarshabad.
Sarnamam and Sarshabad.
And then they talk about the significance of Om Tat Sat, which are mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
And they say that these represent 3 essential mantras for attaining the supreme God. But they say that these mantras have to be received from a true enlightened saint in order for them to work.
So it's not enough just to know the words.
Exactly.
Got it.
It's about the source.
The source is key.
And then they quote Guru Nanak Ji, who said that the true Satguru or spiritual teacher knows this specific 2-word chanting. And they also bring up Satgurubdas Ji, who said that the enlightened saint possesses this deep knowledge of all the scriptures. So it's really about
they're really
stressing the knowledge aspect traditions, and then they bring it to our current time with this prophecy from God Kabir about sending a representative saint who's endowed with true spiritual knowledge, Tadvigan. And this is supposed to happen after 5,505 years of Kali Yuga. So we're still waiting on that one. And the purpose of this representative is to guide humanity back to Satlok. And they actually say that only the true Saint Rampalji is currently capable of leading individuals to that eternal happiness by destroying the effects of their bad actions through the power of Satnam and Sarnam. And they specifically contrast this with the worship of other deities.
So they're saying this is...
this is the path. And they even quote Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, verse 16, to point out that all those other celestial realms up to Brahmaloka are actually impermanent.
So even those aren't the end.
So Satlok is the only truly eternal and unchanging abode.
Ultimate goal.
All right, so wow, we've covered a lot.
We really...
But to recap, based on all these sources that you've given us, what they're describing is this cyclical existence of birth and death, where we go through these temporary stays in these realms of reward and punishment based on our karma, heaven and hell.
Exactly.
But beyond that cycle, there exists Satlok, this permanent blissful realm ruled by Supreme Almighty Kavirdev. And in this place, death has no power. And the way to reach this eternal home is through seeking out the guidance of an enlightened saint who can give you the knowledge and the practices, including these Satnam and Sarnam, that can help you break free from the cycle of birth and death and reach that ultimate goal of Satlok.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's a lot to think about, right?
It really makes you kind of rethink, everything we think we know about life and death. And
like, if there really is this reality where death is overcome and this permanent blissful existence awaits,
right.
I mean, that changes.
Yeah. It really challenges our understanding of life's purpose.
It makes you think about, how are we living our lives right now?
Right.
What really matters?
Exactly.
What's our ultimate destination?
Big questions.
So thank you so much for sharing these sources with us.
Yeah, no problem.
You've given us a lot to ponder.
Absolutely.
And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a great deep dive.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Take care.
You too.